Smollett is now in custody facing a felony charge after police say his alleged attack and reports that he was victim of a hate crime were all part of a big hoax. Eva Pilgrim is in Chicago. She's been following this case closely all along. And Eva, it sounds like from what police are saying, this started when Smollett sent himself a threatening letter in hopes of boosting his salary, and that didn't quite go as planned.
Yeah, you could hear the police superintendent pretty ticked off that this happened in his city and the nature of this crime with all the issues that Chicago police deal with on a daily basis as is, then to have to add this to the top of it. But it all started because of that letter that they say Jussie Smollett sent to himself. It did not get the attention that he expected it to get, and that was when he started thinking about this next stage, this alleged plot. And he enlisted these two brothers to help him orchestrate and stage that attack. And if it wasn't for the fact that there was good old-fashioned detective work, they looked at all those cameras, some 30+ city of Chicago cameras, some 20+ private security cameras that they were able to go back to and track where those brothers went. They got into a lift, then backtracked them to where they came from to see where they lived and figured out who they were. Getting those brothers to sit down with them ultimately led them to this information and this story of how it all played out, Diane.
And that story apparently originally was that Jussie said he had been attacked, that he had been put in a noose, and that those two men then shouted homophobic and racial slurs at him, as well as making political statements. Police now say that that was all a hoax, but we're looking at a picture right now. Jussie has some scrapes on his face. It looks like he has some bruises. Where did those injuries come from? What do police think happened there?
Well, the police today said they think those injuries came from Jussie himself, that he inflicted those injuries on himself, and then those pictures were taken, and you're looking at them there. You can see the scratches on his face, but nobody, according to the police, did that to him other than he himself, Diane.
And you know, it sounds like this all really turned. Police kept saying in that 47th hour where they detained these two men they thought might be suspects, and then they decided, no, these guys are witnesses.
Yeah, their attorney came in, and the attorney talked to police, and she reasoned with them. Hey guys, I think you need to talk to my clients. They have a pretty crazy story that you need to hear. I don't think these guys are suspects like you think. And when they talked to those guys, they heard this story, and they were able to corroborate their story, that this was all a hoax, that this was all planned, that this was not an attack on Jussie Smollett, by looking at some evidence that they were able to give police, those phone records showing a lot of communication between the two brothers and Jussie Smollett, both before and after the alleged attack happened. Even when the two went out of the country for a bit, they were still in communication with Smollett. And then, of course, you heard the police talk about that check, the check that was written, and that evidence that they have showing that check, Diane.
Yep, $3,500, police say that he paid those brothers. Well, we'll see how this case now plays out. His attorney, of course, is promising an aggressive defense. He's due back in court today at 1:30. Eva Pilgrim, I'm sure we'll have the latest for us on that. Thanks, Eva. And now I want to go over to Josh Margolin, who's on the phone with us, our investigative reporter there. Josh, one of the big things that sounds like sticks out in all of this is how this case turned, how police went about putting it together. And they said they did have questions from the beginning, but they decided to give Jussie the benefit of the doubt until they were able to substantiate that this was a hoax.
Diane, you're absolutely right. The police superintendent in Chicago spent a long time in this press conference giving a master class about how cops and detectives do their work. He gave voice to the fact that there are always oddities and peculiarities in every investigation. Nothing is ever you know, the way it is in a television drama. They had questions, things didn't make sense. And we were hearing from the beginning that things were not 100% making sense. There were a lot of questions being raised on social media. But the truth is, Superintendent Johnson said repeatedly they treated Smollett as a victim here. He reported a crime, and they needed to investigate it. It was really only until they took all of those doubts and then all of the evidence that they had collected, and then in the 2 days of questioning of the brothers, at the last hour before they would have to be released or charged, Superintendent Johnson said that's when They were able to get the information from the brothers that turned this case around. And in that moment, Smollett goes from being a victim to an alleged perpetrator.
Right, and it sounds like the brothers may not have expected the police to be waiting for them. They left the country after the allegedly staged attack and came back about 2 weeks later, police said, and the cops were waiting for them. It sounds like they may not have been expecting that.
They certainly were not expecting that, to have the cops waiting for them at the airport, the way that the superintendent said. But, you know, there's the old saying that there's no such thing as a perfect crime. This may be exactly the opposite of a perfect crime. This may be the most imperfect crime. When you take into account what they did and the fact that they did it in a place with very, very high camera coverage, that was one of the first issues raised by detectives, that this was a crazy thing to occur in an area that's got a lot of camera coverage. Chicago, because of the nature of the crime in Chicago, they've added more police and public cameras to streets for coverage. Plus, they have cameras on buses, and they have cameras on private buildings, and obviously there's the closed-circuit security systems at stores and at residential buildings. So in the end, it almost begs the question of how could anybody have thought they would get away with it? But then they almost did, except for the fact that the Chicago police dedicated a tremendous amount of resources, as Eva said, to go business by business, to get every piece of video. Just one little example we had reported earlier this week as things were developing. The detectives on this case, there was the allegation, of course, that there was a noose placed around Smollett's neck. So they had the rope that was that alleged noose. They then figured out through their research who makes that rope, where it is sold in Chicago and surrounding suburbs, and then detectives went to every store that sells that rope to get all of the video to see who bought that rope in the last number of weeks.
I mean, it looks like they really went through this with a fine-tooth comb. And we heard the detective saying this was both a combination, as you mentioned, of all those cameras in Chicago. He thanked the city for investing in that technology, but also the community coming together. A lot of people volunteering their own private video footage in order to help solve this case. So we heard the police superintendent very angry about the bad rap that Chicago got because of this case. And now he's hoping that maybe knowing that it was a hoax, if that turns out to be true, will set the record straight, so to speak. And one thing maybe we can draw from this case is how the community came together.
Certainly, you can do that. I mean, Superintendent Johnson has an interesting personal and professional story. He came into leadership in the Chicago Police Department in the wake of scandal. And the Chicago Police Department has gone through its trials and tribulations. And there's been an acknowledgement and a reckoning that the police deserves a lot of the bad rap that cops have gotten in Chicago recently. And what Superintendent Johnson has done is he is committed to turning it around. And so you have a situation where a guy from Chicago who came up through the ranks is now in charge. He has what really is a terribly heinous crime that would have occurred if the accusation were real. And so they investigated it thinking they had a terribly heinous crime that needed to be investigated. It turns out it was a terribly heinous hoax, he said. But he definitely wanted to get that message out to the community. He started out the press conference in a very, very poignant way, saying that he welcomed all the media to the press conference. But then he said he only wishes that all of the victims of families of actual crime in Chicago, of gun violence, actually got the same attention from the national and international media.
And he also stressed, of course, the importance of believing victims and how he hopes that this case doesn't then cause people to doubt actual victims of hate crimes going forward. Important message there. Josh Margolin, we appreciate it. Thank you. Now we want to shift gears a little bit to that big question of what will happen to that 24-year-old, Alabama woman who spent 4 years with ISIS. President Trump now says she will not be allowed back in the U.S. James Longman spoke to her earlier this week. He's live in Syria for us. And James, now that President Trump has said she can't come back here, what happens next?
That's the big question, Diane. The issue is, for many of these women who are now leaving the so-called Islamic State, where do they go if the countries where they came from have said they don't want them back? That's now happened on 2 occasions. Both Huda Muthanna and another woman, Shamima Begum, 19-year-old, who from the United Kingdom, also been told she can't go back there. These two women do have the possibility of going to countries where their families originated from. That is a possibility. So Shamima Begum, for example, there was a question perhaps. Her parents have Bangladeshi ancestry, so there was a possibility that she could go to Bangladesh. But Bangladesh has now said she cannot come there. So she is at present at the camp here in Syria, stateless. Now, as for Hoda Mufanna, well, she has Yemeni origin. Her father was a Yemeni diplomat living in the United States when she was born. So the question is, could she go there? But Diane, I've got to tell you, of all the countries on earth that are anything worse than Syria, Yemen is probably worse. So could she really go to Yemen? She has a child whose father was a Tunisian fighter, so he is half Yemeni, half Tunisian at this stage. Could she apply for asylum in Tunisia because she has a son who could claim Tunisian heritage? This is an entirely new area of the law, I reckon. I mean, for countries to basically ban their citizens from coming home, this is going to be a very, very complex situation going forward. The United States is arguing that Hoda Mufanna was never a US citizen in the first place. They say that because, like I say, her father was a US diplomat, she was born in the United States, but she should never have been given a passport. Now, the family lawyer has said that that isn't the case, that actually he stopped being a diplomat just 4 months before she was born, and so she was allowed to have a passport, and she did travel here to Syria on that US passport, making her a full US citizen. So at the moment, I think we're just going to see a back and forth between the family and the American government. But I think there's a bigger point here. This might happen again and again and again, and they might end up with a whole load of people sitting out here in the desert with nowhere to go.
And James, you talk about, all of this kind of stems from ISIS, seemingly slowly at least disbanding, but U.S. forces have been spending years on the ground there fighting. Now we're getting closer and closer to the deadline for their withdrawal. So what are things like over there with that deadline coming closer and closer?
Well, I think a lot of people here are very nervous about US troops leaving this country. That's certainly what Donald Trump wants to see happen. But we've heard now that US allies, the United Kingdom and France, who also have troops here, have said that they will not have their troops replace the American ones, if you like. Donald Trump had asked US allies to stick around in Syria, but they said, well, look, if you're going to leave, we're going to send our people home too. The Kurdish forces here, who've been a big part of the effort against ISIS and have been working together with the Americans, they have been calling for some kind of force, an international force to remain here of about 1,500 or so troops. Could it be that there's some kind of international coalition that does remain? We'll have to wait and see. But this is not a safe part of the world by any means, and people feel that the United States can help make it safer.
All right. James Longman for us in Syria. James, you stay safe. Thanks. And from crisis in Syria to crisis in Venezuela, the U.S. is now promising 200 tons of humanitarian aid, which it says it will put near the Venezuela-Colombia border. But Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says none of that aid is to enter Venezuela. So our own Tom Llamas is live in Caracas. And Tom, why wouldn't Maduro accept this help? And what happens now that he said he won't?
That's a great question. Maduro says that his nation is not a nation of beggars, that they will not take out these handouts. And today, one of the propaganda newspapers is out with a cartoon essentially showing the U.S. aid box with military, U.S. military inside of it. Maduro thinks this is a trap. It is a trap for the Venezuelan people, that the U.S. really want to intervene into Venezuela like they have in Iraq. He's telling his people on state-run TV that President Trump wants to turn Venezuela into a modern-day Vietnam. Now, President Trump, for his part, has heated up with the rhetoric. He's called the Venezuelan leader here a dictator. He said he is a Cuban puppet and that he is not a Venezuelan patriot. Of course, the United States, along with more than 50 other countries, have recognized Juan Guaido as the interim president, the head of the National Assembly. Now, there is a showdown that's going to happen, Diane, on Saturday, because as you mentioned, hundreds of tons of aid is on the border right now. It's about 530 miles southwest of where we are on the Colombia border in a town called Cucuta. And right there have been reports of troop movements of Venezuelans. And Maduro has been very clear about this. He says that aid will not come in, but Guaido has called on more than 1 million Venezuelans, and more than 500,000 have already signed up to help bring that aid in. So what happens? The bridge is closed right now, and so there is some somewhat of a showdown happening. That being said, the border is very porous. Could they maybe sneak things in? They possibly could. But again, Maduro may be moving military into different installations. He's already closed one of the maritime borders with the Antilles, so nobody can fly in or ship in aid either. And this is all happening as 90% of this country, Diane, is living in poverty. They are starving. We've been out in the streets speaking to people, and there's a lot of confusion, but one thing is very clear. They are hungry. They wait 2 hours just to get a bag of sugar, and to get that bag of sugar, Diane, it costs 2 weeks worth of wages. So just imagine that. The average Venezuelan has lost 24 pounds in the Maduro regime, and people tell us here that they want Maduro gone. That being said, they're confused. One person talked to me and I said, what do you think is going to happen on Saturday? And he said, well, when the aid doesn't come in, then the American troops will move into Venezuela. And I said, well, there are no American troops mobilized. And he sort of looked at me sad, kind of confused, thinking he thought there were troops ready to move in because of what Maduro has convinced them, that the Americans want to intervene here. Other people think that Guaido will succeed and he'll bring this in. And others are hoping that the military will drop their arms and let the aid come in. But Diane, there are no signs that's going to happen. The military has said they are standing by Maduro. And if Maduro has the military, he has the power.
All right, got a lot going on there. Tom Llamas, we wish you and the people of Venezuela the best right now. Thanks, Tom. And staying overseas for a bit, Pope Francis is now demanding the end to child sex abuse in the Catholic Church. He told religious leaders they must, quote, listen to the cry of the young who want justice. And this all came at a sex abuse prevention summit in Vatican City. Our own David Wright is there. And David, you know, we've heard these kinds of messages before. What was different about the Pope's message this time?
Well, what was different, Diane, is that this time it came at the beginning of what's really the Vatican's first ever worldwide summit on this. The Pope has summoned bishops from around the world, 190 church leaders from all across the globe, to get them on the same page on this issue. He says the time for platitudes and promises is gone. It's now time for concrete action. That is what people expect. And that's true. It is what people expect. But a lot of survivors are also wondering why this kind of meeting didn't happen years ago.
And David, if he's calling for concrete action, any specifics on what that concrete action will be?
Well, there's a number of things that survivors would like to see happen. We've talked to a couple of survivors who were among a dozen or so people who were invited to chat with the organizers of this conference before it began. Among them, Phil Saviano. He's one of the original Boston Globe Spotlight victim survivors. He went in there, and among the items that he talked about are the need for complete transparency, lists of names of priests who've been credibly accused so that people can protect themselves against those folks after they have been moved around. There's also accountability for bishops. In his case, he said the priest who molested him when he was 11 years old was then transferred to 4 different states where he put other children in jeopardy until he was finally apprehended, tried, and sent to jail for more than 200 years. So they want to see bishops held accountable, the folks that turned a blind eye, that swept it under the carpet, that transferred priests from one parish to another. Now, it remains to be seen whether the church is open to those kinds of measures. Some want it to go even further, but this is the test of this 4-day conference.
And David, I mean, this has been going on a long time. It's been roughly, what, 15 years since the Spotlight crew unveiled those decades of abuse covered up stemming from Boston. But since then, even since that big story came out, we have heard of a number of other accusations of sexual abuse in the church and subsequent cover-up. So is there a sense that there might be real change on the horizon this time?
I think there's a real sense of urgency now because we have seen in the past few months a new wave of allegations, and law enforcement is in particular trying to take this very seriously. You saw that Pennsylvania grand jury report that implicated more than 300 priests, more than 1,000 victims in Pennsylvania alone. Now state after state is following that example, and there's an explosion of attention to this issue worldwide. And so the church recognizes this is a serious threat to its moral authority, its credibility, and they need to deal with it in order to keep faith with the faithful. Diane?
All right, David Wright for us in the Vatican. Thanks, David. Meanwhile, back here at home, authorities have arrested a Coast Guard lieutenant accused of planning a major attack on innocent people. Jack Date is in Washington with the details on that. Jack, kind of horrific when you read the details here. What exactly was he planning to do, and do we know why?
It's absolutely chilling. As you said, Christopher Paul Hassan is a lieutenant in the Coast Guard. He was working at headquarters, and he was arrested by the FBI last week because it appeared he was plotting a mass attack. He was arrested on a drug and firearms charge, but prosecutors took the unusual step in stating in a detention memo that he's a domestic terrorist. They don't say he might be a domestic terrorist. They say he is a domestic terrorist. They just say it flatly. That's unusual. He had a cache of weapons, 15 firearms. He had long guns, a sniper rifle, AR-15s, and an array of handguns. And he was also studying other mass killers and looking at how they did their deeds, and studying intensely and taking some of the steps required to carry out an attack. So the FBI took it very seriously from the outset. They were tipped off by the Coast Guard to look into his background, to figure out what his issues were, and they moved quickly on an investigation. It ramped up fast, and they found all kinds of information through email accounts and other means, and they're taking this very seriously.
So, Jack, what are the specific allegations against him right now?
Well, right now, again, he's only charged with a gun possession and a drug charge. And so, but obviously prosecutors are very concerned about this individual, and some of the materials that they seized appear in court records. Again, the guns and the drugs, in particular some steroids. One of the past shooters, Anders Breivik, who conducted a mass casualty attack, killing 77 of his countrymen, in that case, he had a manifesto where he detailed taking a course of steroids to increase his aggression. So this individual, Mr. Hansen, had acquired illegal steroids and appeared to be sort of collecting all the things that would be necessary to carry out this kind of attack. And some of the people that they believe he may have targeted were very high-profile politicians, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the Minority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, several people who are running for president, including Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. All of those people showed up in items that they were able to seize from his property. So all very concerning. He also apparently targeted or was researching various media figures, television anchors, news personalities. And so, again, they took this very seriously and moved quickly on the case.
All right, we're going to learn more as this case unravels. Jack Date in Washington, we appreciate it. Thanks, Jack.
Sure thing.
And finally, on a much lighter note, we are just a few days away from the Oscars, and today we're going to look at why sound is so important to these films that get honored and how it all comes together. Romina Puga is in Hollywood for us. And Romina, I'm so jealous because you got to look at the sound behind one of my favorite movies of the year, Bohemian Rhapsody. What better movie to look at when it comes to sound?
I did, and they were so cool and surprisingly not sick of Queen music after working on that movie for over a year. But I want to show you where we are really quick. We're at the Dolby Theater grand entrance. The red carpet is laid out. They have a plastic over it to keep it fresh and clean for Sunday. And this entrance is lined with pillars that have every Best Picture winner throughout the years. I mean, there's On the Waterfront from the 50s, West Side Story from the 60s, and on the opposite sides are all the 2000s. And that 2018 spot is blank, waiting for Sunday to figure out who wins Best Picture this year. One of those nominees is Bohemian Rhapsody. They have 5 nominations, one of which is sound mixing and editing. And I got to talk to them earlier this week about how they turned Rami Malek's voice into Freddie Mercury's.
For Live Aid, we used Freddie's vocal, but we did also, I went through and I did find little bits and pieces of Rami's breath and lip smack and inhales and blows on the mic. We got a whole library of things from Rami that I could weave into Freddie's vocal to make it really feel like Rami is singing with Freddie's voice. So, because it was just so important that you never questioned that.
The first thing we shot was Live Aid. That was the start of the shoot.
Oh, wow.
So that was quite intimidating for everyone. And I always remember thinking, well, I mean, if we feel like this, how does Rami feel right now? He's going to go out on stage and become Freddie.
All we hear is so this is We Are the Champions in Live Aid, and I'll play you just the crowd and everything that we added. Well, this is just the music. Just the music. It is the music from the original multi-tracks of Live Aid in 1985, and we did a complete remix on that.
One of the layers of the sound, the Live Aid crowd sound, is that Fox had this amazing campaign, and they asked people to download an app to a smartphone and to sing along with Bohemian Rhapsody. We got a call saying, could we send you all these recordings and could you try and put them in the movie? And so we said, well, how many do you think there might be? They said, well, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000.
That's where it would be. Someone's iPhone recording is in that mix.
Yes.
That's so cool.
That's tens of thousands of individual iPhone recordings along with all of the other crowd work that we've done.
Diane, this team had so much fun working on this movie. They were all huge Queen fans and said that Brian May and Roger Taylor were in the studio with them from day one, helping them with post-production and during the filming of the movie. So it was a dream job for them, a dream job for any Queen fan.
Absolutely. And when you watch the movie, you just get those songs stuck in your head. Just watching your report, I'm going to do the same, Romina, but I am not complaining one bit. Thanks so much. Such an interesting look at that. That's Romina Puga for us live from Hollywood, and that does it for us here at the Debrief today. Don't forget, at 3:30 you can catch all that you need to know about all things politics with The Briefing Room. Again, that's at 3:30, and don't miss us in prime time. World News Prime airs at 8 p.m. Of course, though, we are always on at abcnews.com and at your ABC News app. For ABC News Live, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.